In the lush green expanses of a vibrant African town, Pastor Emmanuel and his wife Grace were figures of immense respect and admiration. Their three grown children had blossomed under the community's watchful eyes, each reflecting the grace and discipline of their upbringing. Emmanuel, a renowned pastor, and Grace, a revered women leader, embodied what many consider the pinnacle of spiritual and marital harmony. Yet, within the walls of their home, draped in the shadow of the church spire, lay a starkly different reality. Pastor Emmanuel, though a shepherd to his flock, was a ghost in his own home. His presence was reserved for the pulpit or church meetings, leaving Grace to shoulder both parental and marital duties alone. One particularly quiet evening, as the sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Grace sat in their living room, the silence around her heavy with unspoken words. Pastor Emmanuel, just returned from a church conference, seemed distant, his mind
Emmanuel, I've been feeling a bit disconnected from you. It's been months since we've been close.
Grace, you know we have 3 children. Our physical needs took a back seat a long time ago. We should focus on spiritual growth, not carnal desires.
But intimacy is also a blessing from God, isn't it? For a husband and wife to connect.
We have served our purpose,
he
Grace.
replied sharply,
this is a trivial matter.
his tone final, leaving a cold silence between them. Frustrated and hurt, Grace reached out to the church's headquarters to speak to the Mommy G.O., hoping for understanding from the lead pastor's wife, who they fondly call Mommy G.O. However, the response she received, you won't believe it.
Your Lordship, Ma, I'm not happy, Ma.
My child, and why is that?
My husband does not have time for me. He never had time for the kids when they were around. Now he hardly touches me. I feel so lonely in my own marriage.
Grace, you are becoming distracted. Your role is to support Emmanuel and maintain your family's image. Do not let worldly desires threaten the ministry. Remember, a wife's duty is to bolster, not burden.
Feeling utterly alone, Grace's heart ached for recognition, for love. Her contributions, it seemed, were merely expected, not appreciated. Weeks passed until one mundane afternoon, as Grace prepared for a trip to the market, her dress zipper jammed. With no one at home to help, she hesitantly approached James, the young, handsome security guard who stood by the gate.
James, could you please help me with this zipper?
Of course, Mrs. Grace.
As she asked, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. James replied, his voice so gentle, with so much respect. As he deftly adjusted the zipper, his fingers accidentally brushed against her skin, sending a shiver through her body. The touch sparked a surge of emotions long suppressed, and in a moment of profound vulnerability and desperation, they found themselves wrapped in a forbidden embrace, surrendering to a passion she had been denied for years. Their moment of indiscretion, however, was shattered by the sharp sounding of a clearing throat. Pastor Emmanuel stood at the doorway, his face contorted in shock and anger. He almost strangled the security guard. James found his way and quickly ran through the door as Pastor Emmanuel yelled at him. And then Pastor Emmanuel followed him, even to the sitting room, but James ran faster. And then Grace came into the sitting room, and then Pastor Emmanuel, looking at her, yelled out, "Grace, what is this abomination?" "Elijah, I'm so sorry," I've been so lonely. I felt so untouched. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Silence! You have defiled our home. You have defiled our marriage and my ministry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. Please. And after that moment, it felt like their whole world crumbled. When their children got to hear of this, they were devastated. The news had spread everywhere. The church people had heard. Only God knows how that news got out. But it was a trying time for them. The distance between them grew. As Grace kept trying to plead with Pastor Emmanuel, he never gave her listening ears. He was torn. Grace was more torn because she loved her husband, and I know Pastor Emmanuel loved her dearly too. As the community reeled from the scandal, Grace could not even walk the streets without hanging her head in shame. Pastor Emmanuel just kept himself in his room, always sitting in the gardens of his house, looking up in the sky and asking God questions. One day, Grace and Emmanuel faced their fractured lives. Their home, once filled with the sound of shared prayers, was now laden with the silence of broken trust. They had to sit across from each other at the kitchen table. The tension thick between them. Pastor Emmanuel broke the silence. His voice low and strained. He said, "How could you, Grace? After all we've built, after all we stood for?" Grace's eyes were red, her voice trembling. "Emmanuel, I've been alone in this marriage for years. You've been absent, emotionally distant. I reached out for something, anything, someone, anyone. It was a moment of weakness. I am so sorry." But to jeopardize everything, Pastor Emmanuel said, our reputation, our ministry, Emmanuel's voice rose with each word. His hands clenched on the table. "I was never part of everything, was I?" Grace asked. "It was always about the church, your image, not us, not me." Grace shot back, her frustration boiling over. Emmanuel looked away, struggling with the weight of her words. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice even softer now. I didn't realize. I thought I was doing enough, being a provider, a leader, but not a partner," Grace added quietly. "Not a lover. I needed you, Emmanuel. I needed my husband." The room fell silent again as they both considered the chasm that had grown between them. Finally, Emmanuel reached across the table, his hand tentative. "Can we find a way back?" Emmanuel said. "Is there a path to forgiveness, to rebuilding?" Grace met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and hope. "It will take time. It will take effort from both of us. We need to start seeing each other, hearing each other again." Emmanuel nodded, the first tear he had allowed himself in years slipping down his cheek. "I want to try, Grace. For us, for what we once had. They held each other's hands across the table, a fragile link as they faced the uncertain road ahead. Their conversation had opened a door to painful truths and the possibility of healing, marking the step towards mending what had been broken. And in this, they both hugged each other and hoped for a brighter future.